All right. Hello, everyone. We are now at lesson 3 or tape 3. We're into the statistics section of unit 1. So I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. Okay, so here we are with our statistics part. We are on page 15 of 90. So we've already finished the sets part. We're moving into the stats part. So before we get started, I want to tell you about the stats. Now, stats is a very big subject area, but we are not going to be delving into all the parts of stats, only certain parts. And it's broken down here in our little paragraph where they give us the meat of what topics we're going to be talking about, some of the things we're familiar with. We're going to be talking about measures of central tendency and the measures of dispersion, our normal distribution curve, z-scores, the weighted mean, and then we're going to look at frequency, polygons, histograms, stem and leaf plots. We've heard of those things probably in 4th or 5th grade, some of you. And then looking at how we're looking at grouped or our raw data and how we're going to take that raw data and put it in these different forms or pull them out of these forms so that we can evaluate them and see what's being said or paint a picture about what's being said about these things. So first things first, we're going to look at some raw data and see what it's talking about, what it's telling us, and then put it into our frequency table so that we can actually look to see what we can get from it. So when you look at raw data, it's just some data. You don't even know what it is. So you actually have to group it somehow so you can actually make some inferences about it. And usually you do this with a frequency table or frequency distribution table so you can see how this data that you're looking at is distributed, how often it occurs, and that's where the word frequency comes from. So the frequency of how often this data appears. It could be from some type of survey you did or something that people do. So our whole lives, we're going to be in somebody's study. They're going to call you on the phone and ask your opinion about something. You're going to be collecting data through for research for yourself with your jobs. So our lives here on this earth is about collecting some type of data. Okay, so this is how one of the ways that they organize the data so that they can look at it. Okay, so here we have this raw data. So suppose we collected the following raw data. So then you have each piece of data is accounted as the raw data. So this is known as your N. So the number of pieces of data that you have is known as your N value. So you're going to collect it, say you talk with 30 people or 40 people, then that pieces of data that you get from them is going to be 40 pieces of data, or N equals 40. And so that's what we have here, some pieces, and we're going to count them to see how many pieces we have. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We have 20 pieces of data here. So my N equals 20, right? 20. So is, oh, shouldn't write in cursor, sorry. All right, so N is the number of pieces of raw data you have. That's our N, okay? All right, so now that we've identified that, now we need to try to organize this thing to see what we're looking at. When we look at this raw data, we should see we have some 1s, some 2s, I see some 3s, some 4s, 5s, some 6s, and that's it. It doesn't go any higher than that. So we have 1 through 6. So we see 1 through 6. So our data items are the number of unique items that we have. So we have 1 through 6. So for a data item, that's our X. We're going to label this 1 through 6 because we can see that we clearly have those items identified. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So here's our unique items, our data items. Now we need to see how often do these things occur, hence the frequency of these things, our F value, right? So this column will depict the number, okay? The number of times. You see how we just counted. We identified the uniqueness of them, and then we just counted to see how many we have. So we have 20 of these items. We need to see where they fall in these data items. So our column F is the number of times these items occur. All right. The number of times the items occur or appear. All right. So here we are. Now we got to count again. So this is where your pencil, your pen, your accuracy helps now. So now you can cross it off as you're counting to make sure you get everything. Or if you feel fine about just pointing, that's fine. Here we are with number 1. How many times does number 1 occur? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 times I see it. So I'm going to put a 9 here because the 1 occurs 9 times. See what we're doing? Okay, now how many times does 2 occur? 2. We have 1, okay, 2, 3. And that's how many times? Okay, I see it 3 times. You don't want to leave anything off. That's why I'm marking it off, because that helps me. So whatever helps you. Some people will circle them. Some people will put underline them. Whatever works for you, do it. Right? Now, how many times does the 3 occur, and the 4, the 5, and the 6? Pause the tape here and finish filling in the table, and then come back and we'll check it out. Okay? All right, we should be back now. Let's check our values. We should have found out that 3 occurs 1, 2, 3 times. Okay, did you get that? The 4 occurs 1, 2 times. The 5 occurs 1 time. And the 6 occurs 1, 2, 2 times. All right, did everybody get those values? To make sure that we are correct and we have everything accounted for, you should total up your frequency column. Now we know what the total should be because we did it up here, okay? We know that it should be 20. So your frequency column is nothing but your N. And so if you're giving a frequency table and they ask you to find out what your N is, okay, then, or how many pieces of data you have, then you know that you just need to add up your frequency column. So we have 9, 3, plus 3, plus 2, plus 1, plus 2. You add that up, right? We do get 20, right? Are we all right? Good. Okay, so we know how to fill in our frequency table. We know that the frequency column adds up to our N value. That's going to be very important, right? So now, in the homework, you're going to have a lot of problems with the bar graph, or we call it histogram. So read up on variations, differences, etc. So That's going to be really important. And we're going to just hit a couple of them. So just make sure you read the directions of them when you're doing the homework, because they'll tell you some of them you'll have the lower and the higher part, because the bar graphs are going to be merged together, not going to be separate all the time, or some will be close and you'll see it. So they're going to tell you in the directions what to look for. So make sure you be very careful in what you're looking for. Here, we're going to construct our bar graph to represent the data here. All right, pull it down a little bit. In our bar graph, you'll see that you, of course, have an x-axis and a y-axis. Your y-axis always usually corresponds to your frequency. The x-axis corresponds to your data items. So x value, data item, f frequency is your y value. So for our data item, keep my pen right here. Here's our that's our data item. And I don't know how I'm gonna do this, but this is the frequency. Let's see if I can do it. All right, the frequency. Okay, so what we're going to do is label our graph. So the data item, we know we have 1 through 6. So that's pretty good. We can just do 1 through 6. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And our frequency, you notice that we have the highest number is 9. But if you look on our frequency table here, our graph, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We only have 6 lines. So we can't label it 1 through 6, because then our 9 is going to be off the chart. Okay? So what we're going to do is here we can negotiate. Now in your homework, make sure you're paying attention of how they're labeling it, because they can label it by 2s or 4s or 10s. Okay? So make sure you're watching that. What we're going to do is we're going to label it by 2s, because I know if I do it by 2s, I'm going to be able to fit my 9 on there. All right, so here we go. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay. All right, so we've got our frequency labeled. All right, we have our data items labeled. Now we're going to construct our bar graph to represent these items. So starting with 1, we see the frequency goes up to 9. So right here on the 1 line, and this is 9, so if this is 8 and this is 10, then we know that 9 is in the middle here. So just guesstimating it. Remember, it's not rocket science, okay? So it's going to look something like this. And again, if you do this on your paper, you don't need a ruler per se, okay? And you're going to color it in. You can use your color pencil if you like. You don't need to. Just shade it in, right? So that one represents our first one. Our second one is 2, and it goes all the way up to 3. So if this is 2 and 4, then 3 is in the middle, so somewhere about right here. Okay. All I'm doing is transferring our data from our frequency table into our bar graph, right? Then we have 3 lines up with 3 as well. So here we are right here. 3 and 3. Okay. 4 and 2. That's right on the line. That's good. Okay. And then 5 goes to 1. So 1's right here in the middle. And 6 goes back up to 2. Okay. So there's our bar graph that represents the data in our frequency table. So remember, our x-axis represents your data items. All right, whatever you're talking about, they may label it whatever the the subject area is of the survey. Your frequency is your y-axis, how often something occurs. They may ask us to tell from just looking at the bar graph how many, what's your n value here. So just looking at the bar graph, we should be able to tell by adding up the values of our bars. So if I looked at my bar graph, just say we didn't have our table here. Looked at my bar graph, I can say, oh, this is 9, this is 3, this is 3, this is 2, this is 1, and this is 2. And then I can add those values up, and that would give me my n. Do you see how that works? You can get all the information you need from this bar graph, not even having the table. So that's where you're going. Okay, so we're getting with reading our table, being able to pull the information off. They are looking for you to interpret that, just pulling the information off and finding out what is happening. Okay, so read the questions carefully from your homework and what they're asking. All right. Again, there are many ways that they're going to use this. Okay, use these tables. Again, you're going to have just a couple of handful of questions there using these bar graphs or histograms. So check out those ways using on your online homework and look at the videos that come along with them. All right. The next way we're looking at is a frequency polygon. So sometimes you'll have a graph looking at that, but looking at our frequency distribution table, that is a grouped frequency distribution table. So when you have data items that are so far spread apart, so you have like really small numbers going to really large numbers, but you don't have any room. We're not going to have a frequency distribution table that's really, really large. At most, you're going to have only about 6 categories, okay, on your frequency distribution table. That's about all you need. If you have 20 and 30 of them, you got too much, okay? So that's where the group thing comes in at. So you're going to put them in categories or groups. We call them classes, so that you can condense it and put them all your data into your frequency table. And that's what we're about to do right now. So here we are looking at the data that it gave us. Here's our raw data. Go ahead and tell me what my n is here. I'll give you a second just to do that. We're counting. Remember, counting just tells us how many we have. Go ahead and do it. This way we'll get a chance to look and see what numbers they gave us too. Okay. We should have finished counting right now. All right, here we are, looking for our n. We have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. Did you get that? So we know that our n equals 24. Now we know we have 24 pieces of data. Let's go ahead and put them in our table. Now you see how they started us off by creating our classes for us. They started us off looking at the range of numbers that we have. We have a 7, 22, 49. Then we go back to 2, the 40s, a 17, a 30. We're all over the place with these numbers. So to help us fit it into our frequency table, we're going to create classes that's going to range starting from 0 to 9. Now, you want to have a set amount. You don't want to be all over the place with your grouping. Your groupings need to be exactly the same for each one. So if you start off in one pattern, you've got to keep it consistent. So 0 to 9, that's 10 numbers, right? Do you see that? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 10 numbers there. So anything that falls within that order, right, that pair, that grouping, that's going to fall. We're going to count those numbers and put them into that frequency. So they started us off with 0 to 9. Let's finish writing out our groups so we'll know where everything is going to go. So if this is from 0 to 9, then this should be from 10 to what? Remember, it's got to be 9. You got to count the 10, right? So if it helps, use what God gave you here. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, right? So 10 to 19. So then that means that this is 20 to 29. You see the pattern coming out now. 30 to 39. 40 to 49. 50 to 59. Keeping the same structure, the same pattern, same number of grouping, all right? That is going to keep us consistent. All right, so now we've got our groupings. Now we can start putting these numbers in. Again, this is where it's going to help to cross this stuff off so we can make sure we get everything. Here we go. Everything that falls between 0 and 9. Here we go now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you see? That's 4 numbers. All right, keep going. Between 10 and 19. So somewhere in that grouping. And remember, it could be 10 and it also could be 19. So keeping our focus now. Here's 1, 2, 3. Okay, looks like 3. You see what I'm doing? Okay, go ahead and pause the tape right here. Finish out your frequency column, and then we'll check the rest when we come back. All right. Okay, so here we are checking the numbers. We should have gotten 4, 3, 8, and 2. When we add all of these up, again, it verifies that we got n equals 24. All right, so now that we've put our values into our frequency column, in your homework, you may be asked to do a cumulative frequency. All right, so what you're going to need is to know how to do a cumulative frequency. And that is just simply adding up your column, so to speak, to find out how many values you have, or how many data items you have at a certain point. So I'm going to create a new column right here. Cumulative frequency column. What they simply want you to do is we're going to simply add, okay? Here's how we're going to do it. The first column, when we add it, it's just going to be what it is for. There's nothing to add to it. But then when we get to our next row, we're going to take 4 and add 3 to it, and that's going to give us 7. So at this particular point here, we have 7 total items, right? That's what cumulative means, to add together, right? So we have 7 total items here at this particular stage when we add these two things up. Do you see that? So when we get to our next row, we're going to take and do the same thing. So here, what do we do? 4 plus 3. Little one. 4 plus 3 equals that. Then we're going to come here and say 7 plus 4. And that gave us 11. Do you see what I'm doing? Then 11 plus 3, 14. Then 14 plus 8, go ahead, 22. Okay, and then 22 plus 2 equals 24. Okay, again, you know you're on the right track, that when you get down to the end, you should have the total number of ends that we know we have, which is 24. So our column here representing our cumulative frequency, this is it. So if they ask you some questions about that, for instance, what is the cumulative frequency of our third class? Remember, these are our classes. The third class would be here, 20 to 29. What's the cumulative frequency there? 11. Okay, that way you don't have to sit there and try to get up there and try to add them all up by hand. You can easily do it here by creating this column. Okay. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's answer some questions about this goodness. All right. And then we'll draw our frequency polygon. Okay, so it says, what is the class width? Again, remembering our parts, these are called classes, okay? So the width just simply identifies how many points are involved in these classes, right? So the class width for us from 0 to 9, we said was 10. So 10 to 19, that's 10 values. 20 to 29 is 10 values. So our class width consists of values. How can you find this out another way? You can simply subtract either the lower values or the upper values. So when you have a class, you have limits. So you have upper limits and you have lower limits of the classes. So the smaller number, reasonably enough, is your lower limit. The higher number is your upper limit. So you can take the higher limit, say the first two classes, take the higher limit and subtract it from the lower limit, but the bigger number from the second one, 10, and subtract it from 0, you'll get 10. So for instance, 10 minus 0 is just 10. And it'll tell you what your class width is. Same with the upper. So this is lower, or you can do upper, which is 19 minus 9 leaves you 10. So either way, you can find out what you need. Or you can go old school with it. You just count on your fingers like you did. It always works. Okay. Then they ask you, what is the upper class limit of the fourth class? So what is the upper class limit of the fourth class? So we've got to count down to the fourth class. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they want to know what is the upper class limit of that. What is it? 39. Simple enough, right? Now, what is the lower class limit of the sixth class? So the sixth class is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But the lower limit is 50. All right. So we talked about upper class, lower class, and class width. All right. So take the difference. In order to get the the class width. Either count on your fingers or take the difference of the adjacent lower limits or upper limits and subtract them. So the difference means subtraction in math, okay? So take the difference of the adjacent limits, either the lower or the high or the upper, and so when you subtract them, it will give you the class width. All right, now let's go ahead and fill in our frequency polygon. Again, your data item, and your frequency. All right, there we go. So we see we have our groups here, so we're going to label these as our groups. So we have 0 to 9, and then 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30, 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 59, right? When you're dealing with a polygon, that is a graph that has a series of dots representing where your data lies, and it's connected by a line. And that line is anchored on both ends. It's always anchored at 0 to start, and then anchored someplace else at the end of your data. So our anchoring point is going to be here at our origin. Now we're going to place our information here. So in our first set of information, we said that at our first grouping or class, our frequency has 4. So we're going to label here. After we look at our frequency, we see it goes all the way up to 8 is our highest number, but we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 again. So I'm going to group these as 2s again, so I can make sure I get everything on a graph. So here's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. Okay? So again, watching how they label their y-axis, okay, as well as their x-axis. So now we're going to plot our points. So our first grouping goes up to 4. Put your dot there. Right? And then 10 to 19 goes to 3. 3 is in the middle, right? So not rocket science, just do the best you can there. And 20 to 29 is 4. Okay. 30 to 39 is 3 again. Okay. 40 to 49 is 8. So there we are up there. Okay. And then 50 to 59 is 2. Okay. And we don't have anything over here, so I'm just going to extend my line so that I can put a point here and anchor it. Okay. Now I'm going to connect my lines. Let's see how good I can do it with this pencil. Okay. Here comes that connect the dot book that we was doing when we were kids, right? Comes in handy now. Okay. And then I'm just going to anchor it someplace on our graph. So it looks something like that. So there's our frequency polygon. And being able, again, to read and interpret what they're giving you on your frequency polygon. So again, if they ask you how many data items you have, they're going to ask you again, you can just simply add up the points where they are, add up those frequencies. They may ask you how many times something happened in one of these intervals. Then you can go up and you should be able to read your graph. Okay, again, follow the instructions of the problem. You should be able to simply pick the information right off of the graph. Okay, all right. move on. Okay. So before we get there, I'm going to end now. We've looked at the first 2 pages of our next lesson. So this should get us through our next set of homeworks. All right, good luck with your work. Make sure, again, you're reading the questions carefully. And don't forget to read that supplemental information they give you. Don't just skip over it. It does have some value, and it helps to guide you with your answers to your problems. Okay? All right, I'll see you in the next video.